I'm going to bring Q in to have the conversation about Kant's refutation of the arguments for the existence of God. Q, how are you?
Yep. Hey. So I wanted to call in and talk about Kant's various different proofs or refutations against the proof of God. So I haven't seen any of the previous episodes talk about this. Are you guys familiar with this?
Vaguely. It's not something I've studied in depth.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it.
Overread a little bit. Is essentially he started off with the kind of the arguing against the ontological, teleological, all those things as invalid, and then kind of developed it a little bit further. But you go into it and tell us what what it was specifically you wanted to talk about. Fill in the gaps.
Yeah. So it's been a while since I talked about this with other people. Quite a few years since I was in the university. So Richard, you're right. So he has essentially a refutation of different main types of proofs of God. And it's interesting because a lot of it is stuff that we hear when people call in. It's just, it's just a different name. So the ontological argument is basically the argument that God is perfect, so he must exist, kind of thing. And then there's a cosmological argument, which is basically the Kalam argument, right? The Kalam argument is also called a Kalam cosmological argument. And the third one is the teleological one, which says, if the third is the teleological argument, which basically says there's some purpose that we need to that's out there, and so for that purpose there must be a God, right? So those are the three types, and you hear one, some flavor of this used by theists all the time. Follow so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to kind of go over this or kind of give different examples of these, and kind of using examples of what I've heard in some of the past shows, and then give what Kant's response to this would be. And one thing to know is, Kant is a very famous German idealist. So he believes in, things that are beyond our senses, these ideal things. And in a certain sense, he kind of considers, that to be kind of God's realm. And his whole point is that you really can't have access to that, what he calls the noumena, the noumenal realm, which is, where the perfect forms, etc., kind of similar to Aristotle, Plato's forms would exist. So he says that doesn't exist. And what we have is access to the phenomena, which is what we can see and sense, etc. And he kind of
just quickly before you jump into this, what can I ask you? What your kind of positioning on this? Is this something you agree with? Do you agree with Kant, or do you disagree with him and have your own kind of arguments against these things? I'm just interested on your own personal position in this.
Yep. Yeah. So I was really into Kant, and in fact, I did my undergrad thesis on him, but not on his ethics or his proof of God. But at the time, I was really into his refutation. But one thing to consider is that Kant actually goes and tries to say that there is a God. So Kant is not an atheist; he's a theist. So for me personally, I feel I'm a hard atheist. I do not believe that God exists. So that's my position.
Okay. So why don't you give us one rejection of one of the arguments for God, and we need to talk about that.
Yeah. So the one I like the best is this the argument against the ontological argument. So the argument again is to say that that God is being perfect, that if God did not exist, it would not be perfect. So thereby, God has to exist simply because of his perfection. And the simple refutation of that, obviously there's more, is that existence is not a predicate, meaning that existence is not a property that you can assign to a God. It's basically a state. So you have an existential state. So you could have a God that has all the properties of perfection, but existence is not a property, so it's not one of it. The example is he talks about two different types of judgments. One is the analytic judgment, where the predicate is contained in the subject. So the example is, all bachelors are unmarried. The very nature of being a bachelor comes with it, it being unmarried, he being unmarried. Mm-hmm. And then there's a synthetic judgment where you're adding something to it, adding a predicate to the subject. So the example is, the cat is on the mat. So it being on the mat is not part of the property of the cat. And what Kant is saying is that God exists is not bachelors are unmarried, it's a cat is on the mat type of judgment. That your concept of God, and if you add to it, or if you say it exists, you are adding something to it that's not part of that. So it's not part of the ontology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that kind of that rests quite well with Hume's kind of ideas about the rejection of God as well, because in Hume we get the idea that in essentially in Hume's kind of ideas are that we get what comes into our mind is what comes in from outside is real, and we cannot imagine something that we haven't got experience of. Therefore, we can't have this idea of this perfect God, because all we're doing is we've never seen this perfection. So what we're doing is we're just magnifying these qualities of good that we do know to this ultimate thing. And therefore this perfect being that we imagine as God cannot exist. And I think that marries quite well with what you've just said about Kant. I don't know what you think about that. I'd like to have your kind of feedback on that.
So it's interesting because, Kant, his critique of pure reason, he begins it by basically saying that David Hume woke him up from his slumber to, push him to write that huge treatise. So there is a connection between Kant and Hume, but Kant is, you could almost say he's the opposite extreme. Although, as you pointed out, there are some similarities. Hume would never say that there is this kind of this realm, this, essentially kind of sort of a spiritual realm, the noumena. Hume would never say that, but all of Kant's philosophy revolves around that.
Yeah, I like that. Jim, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I don't hear anything I disagree with or can add to. The ontological argument is, I think, ridiculous on its face. I can't imagine a greater God than the one in the Bible, and a greater God than most Christians attribute to. So I don't see how that means that God actually exists. I don't see how you get monotheism out of that either. But those are completely different questions for going on what we can imagine. But yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean,
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I think this is really interesting because, as you said, Kant, did have leanings towards theism, shall we say? But also, he believed in things like free will and things like that. So it's really interesting when you get philosophers like Kant, who kind of will, on one end of the spectrum we would probably agree with, and on the other end of the spectrum we would probably disagree with. And it's great diving into those guys. Like I say, he's not someone I've personally looked into very much. I've just kind of read brief overviews and whatnot. So it's great to have a call talking specifically about Kant's philosophy. I was wondering what if you had any criticisms of the things like free will that he did accept and the belief in God and things. If you have, because you're obviously, you seem to know quite a lot about Kant, and you seem to be very enamored with some of his arguments. So, what about those that you disagree with from him?
Well, I mean, I disagree with the proof that he gives or his. It's not really a proof, but how he sort of demonstrates that God exists. And the reason why I disagree with it, and, it's something that I didn't know at the time, but he basically has a precept argument for God. And he puts it as basically, as part of his ethics, his morality, that he feels that there must be a God. You have to kind of presuppose a God for there to be this objective deontological morality. So and it's not necessarily a Christian God, but the idea that there is something beyond the phenomena that's there that provides the duty, the onus, and also on a free will side that it's kind of coming from that that God, and you can't really have this a moral action that's done in free will unless there is God. So I don't agree with that.
Isn't it great that we get these kind of and I'm not just talking about your let's face it, shit YouTube philosophers, but like even your classical philosophers who are out there, and you get this kind of thing, and those that believe in God seem to fall into two categories. They seem to fall into those that will either presuppose God exists at the beginning, or kind of when you get these arguments from design. And they go through these, Anselm did it, where you go through these elaborate arguments of, the world looks like it was designed, etc. And then at the end with, well, it must be God. Everybody knows it's God, don't they? And it's just like a really crap ending. There's no thought being put into it. It's just a supposition that if of all these candidate designers, even if we said for the sake of argument the world had been designed, of all the candidate designers we have, whether it's some kind of alien species that have designed the universe in a kind of contact way, like in Carl Sagan's novel, or whether it's these whether it's like me and Jim talked about, I think last time when we were on this show, this idea of a synthetic universe, like what's the word I'm looking for? This created like from a computer simulation, the simulation type universe, and we've got these different candidates, and yet these great philosophers who are theists seem to disregard all these other candidate explanations just in favor of, well, it's God though, innit? That's it. It's just God, and that's what they fall back on, and I find that really kind of. I find it frustrating in one light, but I find it really amusing in another, that they've like put all these thought into these elaborate arguments and then just kind of rest on this pretty crap just conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see. I mean, when I watch some of these videos and also in the comments, I definitely see a lot of theists who, try to make an argument, but at the end of the day, it just comes down to, I feel like there's a God, so that, that's what I will believe. So, there's that, they basically don't care that it's a crap argument as long as, it confirms their viewpoint.
Yeah, it's almost like they've been sold on the idea of God and then try to use reason to justify their quote unquote purchase of the God's concept, right? Rather than starting from a clean slate and working their way to God. They don't ever truly do that. They just seem to start with God and then work backwards, and that's never going to work. We know that that's the case for William Lane Craig, right? Because he's admitted it in public multiple cases. Is he got sold on the idea of God, and then he uses the Kalam to justify his belief rather than the other direction. So yeah, it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side too, I mean, I see a lot of atheists who try to argue against God and, struggle themselves because they're, they really can't provide a really good argument. And so what I see mostly is, atheists basically saying that, well, you have to convince me. So, the burden of proof is on you. And, you're sort of at an impasse because then the theists would say, you have to, give me a reason why you think there's no God, and you don't get anywhere.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting point to make because, and it's not this definition of atheism thing is not something I like talking about a lot. But I think in this particular instance, it's a really good point, and because what we're talking about now here is like we're talking about from the philosophical standpoint. Now, in everyday life, when this conversation comes up, and even on this show, when people call in and ask about atheism and things, my normal response is just simply that I don't believe in God, because I'm not going to argue for fucking 20 minutes about the meaning of the word atheism, because it is a word that has different meanings, and all of them legitimately so. I think, what you've just said is a good standpoint, because I've just mentioned, and it's a good counterbalance too. I've just mentioned that we have a lot of theists out there who watch YouTube videos and become like really crap internet, philosophers because they've watched a couple of YouTube videos. This applies to the other side as well. Mm-hmm. And our side of the fence has the same thing. I see quite a lot in these conversations that I have people. I have really, really good conversations with theists about philosophy. Theists who, like yourself, have done degrees in it, but they're from the other side of the fence. And we have those people I tend to have really good conversations with, because that's my field of study anyway. That's my background. And so we have really good, just genuinely good, honest conversations about it. You also have theists who come up and watch a couple of William Lane Craig videos or these other crap apologists who are out there, and they come up with the same crap arguments they do, and they've not put any thought into it. They've not thought about it. And you can refute God if you know the arguments, but if you've just watched a couple of videos, you are limited to say. And this, again, as stressed, is nothing wrong at all with the definition of atheism that says, I just don't accept God. That's my position on it. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But if you're having a philosophical conversation and you're kind of going down that route, you're going to be left kind of in deep water, because you can have a proper philosophical conversation and not have to go there. You can go into why you don't believe in God and things like that. And it's really, really important. Jim, you look like you want to come in.
So, I mean, also in many cases, like with callers that we've gotten in the past, when you get them onto their back foot and really get them into a corner, one of the tactics is to shift the topic, change the topic. And so one of the ways they'll shift the topic is to simply say, well, you can't prove he doesn't exist. Or, prove he doesn't exist. That is a change of topic to avoid being in a corner where they either have to admit what they believe makes no sense or concede whatever point you're trying to make, right? And they don't want to do that. They can't do that in their head, so they'll change the topic. And so I see that definition of atheism as a tactic to stay on target and to stay on topic, because, I mean, you can watch a lot of these types of shows, and sometimes the caller is able to run the host around in circles. They never really stay on topic, and I'm guilty of that too, of not keeping people on topic, especially when you've got them at a point where they have to concede a point or concede that they're being illogical, right? So sometimes it's a conversational rebuttal, not a philosophical rebuttal, but it's a conversation rebuttal to a shift in topic, so they don't have to admit that they're being illogical or concede your point. So sometimes it's that. And that's two different things I think we have to realize. There's philosophical argument, and then there's conversational argument styles and tactics that can be used. And they aren't the same, and the conversational ones don't have anywhere near the rigor of the philosophical ones, but they're the ones we have more often than we do philosophical ones. So I think sometimes just to kind of remember that too is it's a tactic, conversational tactic to get out of a corner.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'll just add one last thing before I leave. But basically, when you have a theist and atheist, and theists, let's say that they don't really have a good argument, but ultimately it's just their feeling. And then you have an atheist who, doesn't believe a God because there's no evidence for it. And you can kind of see that for both of them, it's essentially a belief state, right? Until someone can provide something more concrete. And so when a theist provides, some, not so good argument, from their point of view, they've made the best argument, for the proof of God that no one could refute. And from the atheist point of view, they're not convinced, so they just kind of stay on the kind of I'm not convinced point. And then, you can't really have a conversation at that point.
I would slightly push back on that, because I think the thing is, when you're looking at justification for something, you can reasonably say, I would say anyway, that you can reasonably say that if there isn't evidence for something and somebody is claiming that thing exists, you have a better state of justification than they do for not accepting that thing. And it's a bit like Russell's teapot. If we don't have whether it's there or not is largely irrelevant. That you're claiming that it's there when there's nothing to suggest it's there, that there is no evidence to suggest it's there, is kind of you have less justification in that belief state than you do in the belief that it's not there because there's no evidence.
Yeah, and I think that's where you get to more of a philosophical discussion where the atheist can put in the justification to why their belief state is such and why it makes sense to hold this belief state rather than believing something where there is no evidence. So that's where it can kind of progress into the philosophical discussion. But I do feel like there are a lot of debates, quote unquote debates, that people have where they're just essentially staking out their own belief states.
Yeah. I agree. Q, we're going to let you go. We're going to kind of wrap the show up. I appreciate the call. I like that call. We don't get many kind of calls that are purely on philosophy without people trying to throw us as shit kind of YouTube style philosophy at you. So it's nice to have a kind of call that's in my wheelhouse without I don't know what field house is. I don't know why I said that. Wheelhouse without having that argumentation where we can have just a simple good conversation about it. So I really do appreciate that call.